The Navigating Disability podcast often discusses topics including disability, injury, mental health, and mentions of sensitive issues such as trauma and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care while listening. Welcome to Navigating Disability. Today, we're joined by senior physiotherapist, former sports journalist, and passionate disability sports advocate. Aaron lives with rhinitis pigmentosa. Is that right, Aaron?
It rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It's retinitis pigmentosa. I just call it RP for short. That's what it's commonly known as.
I like that. A degenerative eye condition and brings a unique blend of lived experience and professional expertise to everything he does. From hosting the Disability Sports podcast to playing visually impaired rugby for England, Aaron is all about breaking barriers on the field, in the media, and in healthcare. Join us as we dive into his journey, advocacy, and love for sport and storytelling. Welcome, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting to you both, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
Tell us a little bit about RP.
So RP, as we mentioned, stands for retinitis pigmentosa. So it's probably one of the more common vision impairments. So it's an eye condition, which is a deteriorating condition, and the main symptoms are tunnel vision and night blindness. So I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old. My parents kind of got told this was in about 1996, probably that I was diagnosed. And my parents, got told like your son's got this eye condition. He might go blind one day, and then that's pretty much about it. Really, it was like, well, off you go, crack on, sort of thing. There was no signposting to any support services or anything like that. Throughout my lifetime, my eye condition has got worse. I now have about 5% of the peripheral vision that a fully sighted person has. But the central vision I have is fairly decent. My visual acuity is around 612, 615. So, in good light, I could pick something up and sort of read it as long as the print is, of a reasonable size. So yeah, like I say, it may stay how it is now forever, or in 5 years, 10 years time, it could completely go. And then what can be quite common with RP as well is developing other sort of conditions or symptoms as well. So I've got cataracts, which I was diagnosed with when I was 21. Touch wood, that's been fairly stable, so I haven't had to have that operated on yet. And then I've also got something called macular edema, which is a build-up of fluid behind the centre of the eye, and that can affect the central vision. But again, that's been quite stable, so hopefully that stays that way.
So what was growing up like for you with, your eye condition? How did that kind of navigate you going to school and things like that?
To be honest, I just grew up like anyone else. So when I was younger, my vision was better. I mean, I don't think I ever had more than probably 20% peripheral vision, maybe something like that. But it was, a lot better than it is now. And I got around, I used to run around at school like anyone else did.
Yep.
The only thing I did differently, I guess, when I was, really little was like when we were out at night, if we're on holiday somewhere, I'd like take a torch I just knew that like my parents told me when I was five, like, oh, you got poorly eyes, um, yeah, and at that age you're too young to kind of understand. So we would take a torch out in the dark, so I could sort of help see you get around. But other than that, I just grew up like anyone else. I didn't have really
Yep.
any additional support. It wasn't until I was about 14 that my sight started to deteriorate more, and that's when. So in England, you guys might be aware, when we finished, high school, as it is, I think in Australia, we have GCSE exams, and that was the
Yep.
first time that I had sort of like large print exam papers and extra time in exams to help because that's when things were kind of a bit more challenging. So really, it was from the age of 14 upwards where I needed more support as I went through like the higher education systems. And then when I was 17, I learned how to use a white cane, a mobility cane, because getting around in the dark was obviously very difficult. Obviously at that age, you're becoming a lot more independent. You go out with your mates, things like that. So it was just wanting to be safe, and be able to get around independently at night time. I say I learned to use a cane. I was very reluctant. I think as a young guy, when your mates are learning to drive, you don't really want to stand out. But I
That
had
was
a
my
really
next
good.
question. That was one of my questions actually, is that makes you quite different to your everyday peers. How did you navigate that?
It was challenging. I think just in my own head, no one ever said anything to make me feel different or bad about it. It was just in my own head. I think when you're having to adjust, when you have a condition of any sort that changes over a period of time and takes away kind of some of your mobility, your independence, things like that. it's sometimes the mental side that's hard. And I think it's because, before no one could tell I was visually impaired, but then walking around with a big white stick obviously is quite obvious. But I had a really good, so in England we have, like local councils, and I had a really good mobility instructor, a guy called Jim, a South African guy, and he was really good with me. Like I think he could kind of tell that I was quite reluctant to want to use it, but we built a really good rapport, and I did my training with him, so you go out a few times and sort of learn the different techniques of using the cane and how it can help you, and then eventually, I sort of adjusted to the idea, and I would use it at night time for the first few years because I didn't really feel the need during the day. But then obviously as my sight got worse, I started using it more. But like I say, it was all in my own head because like friends, family, strangers, no one ever says anything to make you feel bad or uncomfortable about it. People are just sometimes intrigued when they see you with a cane, just want
Yeah.
to ask, and so
They
I
see
see
you
that.
as Aaron. They don't see you as the blind kid or the blind man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think sometimes, as I'm sure a lot of people with any condition, sometimes you get asked some quite funny questions. I've had some people ask if my cane is a whip, if it's nunchucks. I just, kind of smile and explain and kind of use it as a chance to, educate people. Some people may not have met someone who's visually impaired. So, I
Well,
think
I've got a really silly question,
I'll
and I
Uh-huh.
go
don't
for
know
it.
if I am being silly or not, but can you drive?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, due to my lack of
See,
peripheral
he's
vision. So,
laughing. I can see the smile on his
no,
face.
it's a very fair question. My central vision. I mean, my central vision probably used to be good enough to drive, but now I wouldn't be able to like read a number plate from the distance that you have to do to pass the test. And also, my peripheral vision is the way to explain my vision best is probably imagine you've got two straws in front of your eyes. If you look through those straws, that's kind of what my vision is like. So it's very tunneled, but what's within that tunnel is quite clear. So yeah, unfortunately, I've never legally been able to drive, but I've been very fortunate to do some driving experiences. So I've driven tanks, driven supercars, flown a plane, things like that. So, there's always opportunities to experience something, even if you can't necessarily get to do it day to day.
So is
And
this a hereditary condition?
So normally it is,
Yeah.
but I'm the first person in my family to have it. So they've kind of, tested my family, and there's no sign of anyone in the family having it. So yeah, I'm a bit of a rare case. I don't know if you guys have heard. In London, there's a hospital called Moorfields Eye Hospital, and I'm part of it's one of the sort of best renowned eye hospitals in the world, really. And I'm part of a study where they're trying to find the faulty gene that kind of causes the condition in people. And I think they've identified the gene in about 70% of people, but I'm still part of the 30% they can't find it. So, like I say, a bit of a unique case, I guess.
and it's quite interesting because you said it before, you can't actually see that you're disabled. Like you look normal, and I hate using those words, but you don't look disabled. So it's quite confronting to people when you would bring out the cane and appear not normal. How did you navigate your university days? Because obviously you're a physiotherapist. That's, you need to be intelligent. I'm not saying you're not intelligent because you're not blind. That came out totally the wrong way. It is difficult for everybody to be successful at uni, let alone someone with an eyesight issue.
Yeah, I think so. I was 18 when I went to university. As you mentioned, I studied physiotherapy, and I went to University of Hertfordshire. So before I actually went to university, I was in contact with the university and met with. They have like I don't know what their official role is, but like disability coordinators. So their job is to support people, at the university who have a disability to help navigate through their studies. And I've forgotten the woman's name now, but basically, she her husband was visually impaired, so she had a good understanding of visual impairment. Me and her husband knew people in common through my days of playing blind cricket. And I actually met with her, and I met with like the head of my course, and they put me in contact with a visually impaired woman called Sarah who had studied at the university kind of a few years prior. So it was really good to kind of chat to her and get her thoughts and listen to her experiences of studying at university. And she had great things to say, so that made me kind of and I got a good feel of the place. It made me feel that that was the right place for me. And so in England, we have something called disability students allowance. So if someone has a disability when they go to university, they can apply for disability student allowance, and it's a government-funded scheme where essentially they'll pay for any assistive tech that you might need, to help you with your studies. So I got given equipment through that, like things like a laptop with magnification software on it, and like a handheld magnifier, things like that that would help. I guess for me, I guess the sort of thing when you first start is like again that whole thing of at that age, you don't want to be standing out, you don't really want to be different. But I guess I think by that point I was starting to learn that actually just being open about it, was probably like the best thing to do. And so, yeah, I was very open about it, with like my flatmates and my friends, and again, people are really helpful. Like if we went to a club, people help you navigate your way across the dance floor because I couldn't see a great deal in a nightclub. Obviously suffering with night blindness. But yeah, I loved university. I mean, had lots of drunken nights out like most students do, and had some really fun times. My flatmates in my first year were a lot of fun to live with as well. A lot of people in their first year don't get so lucky, but I had a lot of fun memories from my time at university. In terms of the actual studies, physiotherapy is like any healthcare course is a very demanding course. I think looking back 18 is probably a little bit young to do a healthcare course. I think, I'd now say to students and things, maybe kind of, go and do another degree first or get experience working as a physio assistant for a year just to give you that experience working in the hospital. But no, like I say, I think in general, university were helpful. I guess the one challenging aspect, sorry, I'm waffling a little bit, but one
That's
challenging
okay.
aspect of university was as physiotherapy students, we do placements. So you would go and work in a different hospital for somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks at a time, and rotate around different specialities. So what I would do when I was on placement is arrange to go and visit. Where I'd be on placement to be shown around so I could familiarise myself with the environment. Also to meet my educators, so like the physiotherapist who was my supervisor whilst I was there, just to talk to them about my vision impairment, what adaptations I might need to help me on placement and things like that. Most of my educators were brilliant. I only had one placement really where, I just felt that it was like you get there on day one, it's like, here's my case, here's, your caseload and crack on, and there was no support. But other than that, they're all very good, so yeah, generally the experience of university was fairly decent, I would say.
Yeah. So there's many of people in our community that feel stuck. They feel stuck in their environment with their disability and find, life tough. And you seem to have navigated it really well. You've got a really good network of friends and family. What would be a key piece of advice you would give someone that doesn't necessarily have that network?
I guess it would probably be to, maybe kind of try and reach out to, if you're aware, if it's someone who's visually impaired, for example, try and reach out to your local sight loss charity or to your council to find out what support services are out there. As you mentioned, I think, I've been very lucky to have a very, supportive network around me, and I think that's key. So for people who don't have that, I think it does make it tougher, there's no doubt, but I think there are always, organisations out there to support you. So, I'm just thinking about it. If you're visually impaired, there's we have a brilliant charity in the UK called Blind and Business. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them, but they basically help blind and visually impaired people into employment. No matter what your industry, they will help you with your CV, with interview prep, things like that. So there's things like that. You've got guide dogs who provide cane training or guide dog training. There's places you can go to go and learn Braille. Your council will have someone who could come out and teach you cooking skills and all sorts. So I think first port of call would be reach out to your local sight loss organisations, and equally social media now is brilliant. Like when I was a kid, I'm sure my parents would have loved to have had something where they could go and find a group of people with a kid who has the same condition to find out what services are out there. I think also doing something where something that was key for me was interacting with other visually impaired people. So when I was until I was 15, I never really wanted to, I never felt any difference. So I guess I never really wanted to acknowledge it and interact with other visually impaired people because I had my friends. But I started playing blind cricket. I've always loved sport, and playing normal like regular sport got very difficult. At that age because your sight gets worse. So playing to the same level was challenging. But then when I started playing blind cricket, I met other visually impaired people, and I started to learn what things are out there to support you and what things are available. So I guess that's the other thing is try and do something where you can start to meet people with a similar condition. You might meet some people that you don't click with, but hopefully you can just meet that one or two that sort of really help you navigate your condition and help you on the right path.
Yeah. So have you gone down the route of Braille? Have you started to learn that as a skill for future? Like, is that something that you've looked into?
So I actually started learning when I was about 17. I it was when you're at school, you have like I don't know what their role is, but it's someone who works for the local authority, and they kind of come in once a month. They work with like all the vision impaired kids, in like the county, and they go in just to see how they get on at school, things like that. So they recommended that perhaps learning Braille. So they recommend learning Braille whilst you still have some sight can be quite useful because first you learn reading it by sight, and then you learn to read it by touch. So I started to learn, but then when I went to university was just very busy. And to be honest, I probably did have the time, but like at that age, I was more concerned about going to the pub and
There
having a
were
few
other
beers,
things.
or playing cricket, things like that. So, and I think my from my experience of friends who are blind or vision impaired, it's I'd say more common in people who are maybe blind from birth or so have no sight from birth or from a very young age that sort of learn to read Braille. I think a lot of people who perhaps lose their sight later in life don't necessarily because technology now. Kind of takes away the need for it necessarily. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think if you can learn it, I think it's definitely beneficial, and I think that would be something I'd recommend. It's not something I've learned yet. Will I in the future? Possibly. I don't know. It depends. We'll see what happens with my sight. But I think if you can learn it, then absolutely, really, really beneficial skill to have.
And I think you're right. The expansion of technology with audiobooks and things
Mm.
like that, people don't actually need to feel it. They can listen to it. What role has sport played in your life and in your disabled life?
Or you're going to regret you asked that question because I could chat
Okay,
to you for
that's
hours
all
about
right.
sport. Sport's been massive for me. I've loved sport ever since I can remember. I've been a big football fan ever yeah, since I was
Now,
like three.
football being soccer, because remember
Yes,
you're a
sorry.
soccer
Yep,
guy.
absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
And I played football growing up for like local teams. Any opportunity I got at school to play, sport, whether that be football, hockey, rugby, athletics, rounders. I'd do everything I could. I always loved it. And then, like I say, when I was 15, that's when my sight got to the point where playing sport against fully sighted people, it was getting harder for me to kind of play at the same level. So when I started playing blind cricket, it was brilliant. Opened up a whole new opportunity to me. So blind cricket within the UK is has a county structure to it. So most teams are backed by a county. So my mum and dad kindly helped establish Hampshire Blind Cricket Club. So Hampshire is the county where I lived at the time, and we entered the National League. So I was an opening batsman for Hampshire for about 5 years. We finished second in the National League one year. That was probably our sort of biggest highlight as a club. I had trials with the England team when I was about 19 for a year. Unfortunately, didn't make the final squad, but to be honest, for me, cricket was just a game that I loved, that I enjoyed playing, and helped me, come to terms with my vision impairment. I then, as I've got older, started playing partially sighted football for a couple of years in the National League, and then in 2019, probably my biggest enjoyment in sport, I would say, has been playing vision impaired rugby. So I've always been a massive rugby fan. My dad was always been a big rugby fan. So again, I've always watched it probably from about the age of 6, and I'm a big Harlequins fan. Go and watch them in England a lot, and so to have the chance to play vision impaired rugby was brilliant. We went out to Japan in 2019 to play a three-match series out there, and then since then we've been out to Ireland a couple of times to play series against them. We went to France in 2023 to play a tournament with France and Ireland, and then in November we had the first tournament international series held in England, which was with Japan and Ireland coming over here. So myself and a few of the other players are involved now with sort of trying to grow the game domestically and internationally to an extent as well. As an England team, we've not lost the game yet, so lucky to play with a group of lads who are very motivated and skillful and athletic. And yeah, it's just been a great experience. Like I say, I never thought I'd get these opportunities to go and play rugby. I'm 33 now. I hope I've still got a good few years left of a few more tours. But for me now, it's about sort of trying to help grow the game so that the younger generations can enjoy it as well. And then obviously having been a sports journalist as well, I've talked a lot about obviously being a physiotherapist. So I qualified as a physio in 2013. I then decided to change careers. I did a sports journalism course at a place called News Associates, which is probably the best place to do a journalism course in the country. That was very intense, working all day, every day. And then I then got some freelance work working at Sky Sports News, which is sort of like the biggest sports news channel here in the UK, and Talk Sport, which is a sports radio station. Really enjoyed, my work doing that. Probably gave up journalism for the wrong reasons. Went through a sort of period of depression and anxiety, quite severely in sort of 2016. So gave things up probably for the wrong reasons. But then last year dabbled in a bit of journalism again. Was very fortunate to cover the Paralympics for Channel 4 here in the UK. That was a brilliant experience. So I took 2 weeks off of annual leave off my physio job to go and do that, and yeah, loved it. It was fantastic. So I've been fortunate to cover a couple of sort of big tournaments like that and the Euros when I worked at Talksport. So yeah, I've been very lucky. So I guess to round it up, sports played a massive part in my life, and yeah, it always will. So
And I
yeah, if
think
it
it's
wasn't sport, I
really
don't know what I'd do.
important for our community and for the listeners to just see that, you know, having a disability shouldn't stop you from doing what you love, because you've had so much joy brought into your life and doing different things with your sight impairment, that it should give hope to others that you can do, if you put your mind to it, there is a way. There's a way you can enjoy those things. So I think that's a key takeaway from what I'm hearing today.
Absolutely. I think you're right. As I mentioned, I went for a few years of sort of really, bad, sort of anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And when I was going through that, I probably stopped doing the things that I did enjoy. And rugby was one of the things that, kind of just gave me my spark back, got me,
I did
gave
want
me.
to, I did actually want to talk about that, Aaron. You mentioned the
Mhm.
depression and the anxiety. Was that related to your disability or was that a separate mental health issue?
And it was a combination of things. I'd say a lot of it was probably site related. I think, I didn't really growing up, I didn't really talk about things a lot. So, like when I'd have concerns, you'd think like, oh, what would my kids ever think if I became a dad? Having like a vision impaired dad, or would someone love you because you're vision impaired, or not wanting to be seen as different, and you don't talk about these things, and there's so many other things that go on in your head, and I just think I got to a point where I was also just burnt out from work, to be honest. Like I say, doing journalism was just very full on. I'd work, kind of 7 days a week, and I didn't really have a life outside of journalism, which now I realise was very wrong. It's important to have, a good, if you want a good career, that's fine, but equally you've got to have time to relax and do things you enjoy outside of it. And so yeah, it was a real combination of things, and I just got very. I think I got very burnt out. I got quite angry about things. If I saw certain things, it would just get me in a down mood, and yeah, it was to the point where you think about ending your life and things like that, and yeah, it was it wasn't a good couple of years, but again, I was very lucky to have a good support network around me, and like I say, the biggest thing though, like it's hard to look back and think, oh, it's like one thing that helped me get out of it, but I honestly think that just doing the things that you enjoy again. Like I say, for me that was rugby. It was also coming back into physio as well. It was just like having a job that, because you're caring for people and you're responsible, and it's a job where you've always got to learn, and develop your skills. Like having that sense of responsibility gives you a purpose in the morning, and things like that. So yeah, I think it's
You
yeah, it
mentioned
helps a
something I
lot.
think was that's very, very pertinent, and that was you get inside your head. I think that's so important because we all have a tendency to get inside
Mhm.
our heads, and our heads can come up with the worst of the worst that are totally not even true. How did you change that thought process?
I think so. At the time when it first started happening, I was kind of freelancing for work as well. So some weeks you'd be full time with work, and then sometimes you might have a slightly quieter periods. And I think that's almost really bad, because then you're just at home on your own, and that's when you have time to just sit and ruminate and think about things. I think that, like as I mentioned, I think having a full-time job again when I came back into physio, and just having that purpose again, getting up, knowing that you have to get up every day and be somewhere, and it takes your mind off things, I think, and then that just starts to give you the confidence to sort of get out and do things again, and like I say, I think when I was in that dark phase, I stopped doing the things that I enjoyed and the things that make me who I am, and I think that was just really key. Then just meeting people, and then yeah, I don't know, just like I say, mental health's a funny thing. Yeah, there's no one way out of it, but I think my biggest thing would be like, definitely talk to people around you. I've got a lot better at that as I've got older. I think, learning as well. Like when I think when you're younger, you always want to be out doing things, whereas now I'm a bit older. I'm sort of I'm quite happy in my own company sometimes, to be honest.
Happy
I'm in that for
being
my
rather
own.
than
Yeah.
doing.
So yeah, I think there's no right or wrong answer for anyone. I think it's just talk to people, make sure you take the time to look after yourself. Have things in life that you enjoy. Yeah, I think they're the important
You
things.
mentioned before, and I don't want to harp on it, but you mentioned before, and I can't remember your exact words about not wanting to live or not being that depressed. And you look back now, and what I'm trying to get at is imagine if you had have taken that final step back then, what you would have missed out on now. How
Mm.
do you balance that in your head? How, if you could say anything to anybody now, someone that's down where you were back in 2016, what would you say to them now to try and change their mindset?
I think first thing is just like reach out to someone and and definitely talk about how you're feeling. I think things will get better. Nothing's ever as bad as you think it is in your head. Sometimes when you're in a dark space, you don't think clearly and logically. I think and it's really not worth taking that step because think of the people around you. Like I kind of look back now and yeah, I just think I'm so glad that I never did take that step because life since I have been in a good place has been really good and just
And it
yeah.
is such a final thing. It's there's so much more to live for.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Like I say, you might not be in a good headspace when you're in a good headspace sometimes, don't make rash decisions and just make sure you reach out to someone and seek help because, it's really not worth it. Life is so great. There's, no matter what your circumstances, there's always, um, great things going on. And I think one of the biggest things as well is like just learning a bit more about things like mindfulness and gratitude and things like that. I'm not saying it's something that I necessarily do every day, but I start journaling a bit, and I don't do it every day, but I go through periods, and I know it's there if I need it. And one thing I'll do is just write down like three things to be grateful for in the morning, and or even sometimes if I'm outside, I try to spend less time on my phone these days and just kind of enjoy the things that are around you a bit more. I think just you get a bit better at those things as well. I think they're really good things to develop, especially gratitude. I think that will help change your mindset a bit too.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of another thing to ask you because you've been so open with everything. It's just I'm sitting here in awe, to be honest, because you are doing so much with your life and just that positive mindset that you're just bringing out. I keep smiling because I'm just like, there are so many people that just feel stuck.
But it's
And
also
it's just,
so real where
yeah.
you've talked, Aaron, about the really hard parts
Mm,
and the really good parts. So it's not that we're just sugarcoating. It's like, no, this is
no,
life. Everyone goes down there.
hasn't a moment. Yeah.
One thing I'd really like to, you've mentioned your parents a couple of times, Aaron. Who who has been your biggest supporter on this disability journey?
I think definitely my family. I think my mum and dad have always been incredibly supportive. I think they've, would never let me use my sight as an excuse for not doing
I
well in
was
something.
just about to
Uh,
say that. I was going to say, did they ever let you get away with things because of your
no,
disability?
no, no, definitely not. They wouldn't let me sit around and feel sorry for myself. That's for sure. I think, and I'm glad about that. I think,
Yeah.
it's good to have, and I think. My parents had me and my sister very young. My parents married, sort of at a young age as well, and I think they've always had, good work ethic because they had to. They didn't have a lot of, actually had a great deal of money when they were very young and had young kids. So they've, worked hard and done well, and I think that's, been instilled in us. And if they listen to this, they'll probably be surprised that I'm being so nice about them because, we have quite a very jokey and sort of piss-taking sense of humour. But no, honestly, yeah, my parents have been fantastic. I couldn't ask more for more. They, driven me around the country to play cricket, always come and watch, my sporting tournaments, listen to my podcast, support everything I do. Yeah, couldn't, they're, kind of good friends as well as parents. I think, my sister as well. Having an older sibling, who's very supportive has always been really nice. Yeah, and then my brother-in-law Damien too. He's Yeah, been incredibly supportive. He's been in my life since I was probably about 13, something like that. So, he's my friends as well. I've got a really good group of mates from school. I think when I was probably about 13, 14, I sort of realized that actually, what's important is to have people around you who are there for you and support you and things like that. And so, a lot of my best mates now are still my mates from school. And, I think being 33, I'm probably very lucky in that sense. I'm going to meet up with a lot of my mates for the weekend. And yeah, and I've got a girlfriend who I've been with probably sort of, I don't know, 7 or 8 months. And, she's incredibly supportive and, amazing person to have in my life as well. So, yeah, no, I'm very lucky, and colleagues too, I think, like I was saying about obviously, with work, I think I've had some jobs where I haven't had the best support in terms of from a sight loss point of view, but like in my current trust, particularly my manager at the moment, Carol, she's very supportive, just lets me crack on with my job and knows that, I'll sort of come to her if there's things that I need and my manager Aislinn before that, they've both been very supportive. So I think that's key as well, and just having a good team of people around you, and it allows me to be, I'm very open with my colleagues about my sight condition. I'll say to them things like, if you tell me where something is, please be specific rather than point and tell me something's over there because I'm not going to see it. But you have a bit of a joke because sometimes they'll say, oh, it's over there, and they joke and realise what they've
Yeah.
said. But it's yeah. So no, like I say, I'm very lucky. But yeah, biggest support definitely family, friends, girlfriend, things like that. So yeah, been very fortunate to have a lot of great people.
About your patients. Have you ever had any negative feedback about a patient not wanting you to treat them because of your sight?
No, and I mean to us, you wouldn't, necessarily know
Never know.
because my central vision is good. Like when I'm sitting there or in a environment and we're having a conversation, you wouldn't know that I'm visually impaired. Um, and I don't think people would anyway, really. I think, I mean, I'm very open with my patients as well. Sometimes if we're talking about sport or rugby, I say, oh, I play for the England vision impaired rugby team, and we get chatting about that. So, and they're always interested. A lot of my patients are sort of elderly anyway, so a lot of them have cataracts and vision impairment. So to us, we quite often have something in common. So
Which would make them very comfortable.
absolutely. And in England, you get a free bus pass when you're 65, but when you're vision impaired, you can get it when you're young. So
Oh,
I
there
Perfect.
you
think
go. There's a
me and
silver
the
lining
80-year-olds have a lot
there.
in common.
So
What
what's
about your
next
pod?
for
Sorry,
you?
Jen.
No, I was just going to say, what's next for you, Aaron? Because you're doing so much now. Do you have any dreams or hopes for other things in the future?
Yeah, I think work-wise, having a vision impairment, sort of ward working can be quite challenging. Wards are quite busy environments. There's lots of things in different places. So, if my sight got a lot worse, I think I'd probably need to look at moving into a different area. One thing I've sort of mentioned to my manager is that I'd be quite interested in possibly going into like university lecturing for like physiotherapy one day. In my current job, I have sometimes like students come for placements or like junior physios who I help supervise, and I think because I've had some really great supervisors and some really great managers, but then I've also had some like experiences on placement or at work where I haven't had, the best sort of experience. And when people don't feel well supported and valued, that's when you kind of lose people and that's when they lose their confidence. And so I think I've always try to, support people as well as I can and hopefully make them feel well supported. And I think that's something I'm really proud of in with my team at work is I think we always get really, I had a physio student, about a month ago and, she had really nice feedback, for the team and all the students we get generally, whether it's work experience or, students coming for placement, generally the feedback we get is nice. And I think that's because we do try to make people feel supported. And so, yeah, lecturing is something I'm interested in. So, I can't say too much on it, but I've sort of applied to do a master's course, but that waiting to see if I get accepted onto that. So that would be sort of studying whilst I'm working full time, basically for like a year. That'd be like the first step in towards getting towards that direction in that career path.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's work wise, I guess. But I think, when I was sort of younger, I think I kind of had these goals and I was like, right, in journalism, I need to be the best sports journalist. Like, otherwise, it's just not good enough. Whereas, like, now it's more about, like, yes, I want to do well, but it's equally just being open to, like, taking, what opportunities kind of come your way. My mum's very much a person of, like, oh, what's meant to be will be. And I think as I get older, I'm probably kind of a bit more open to that as well. Yeah, I think, outside of work, as I mentioned mentioned rugby. We're really trying to grow the rugby, so it's really thriving in England, Ireland, and Japan. It's been played in a few other countries, but we want to get a lot more countries. Like this game has so much potential. Next Rugby World Cup's in Australia. We'd love to be able to get a team set up in Australia and come down there for a tour. What's better than England v Australia in a sporting Series A? There's nothing better than beating.
When is that? Absolutely. When's that, Aaron?
So the 2027, sorry, yeah, is the next Rugby World Cup. Obviously, we've got the Lions tour this summer. So the British and Irish Lions are obviously touring Australia, but it was too short notice for us to be able to, get a team. Because first of all, we would need to try and work with some organisations in Australia to establish a team. So, if we could achieve that over the next few years, come down there would be amazing. So yeah, so rugby wise, and then yeah, I'm sure I'll take on some challenges. Most years I'll be doing some sort of challenge to fundraise for charity. So I've done 3 half marathons this year with my mates running as my guide runners to raise money for the charity that established for impaired rugby. So yeah, well, there's always going to be challenges. I can't just sit still. I sort of
I was just about to say that you sound like you can't sit still.
I, I'm much better at relaxing as I've got older, but I just think for me, and it probably comes from losing my sight. I've always been very determined to like get out and see the world. And
That's
I'm
so
very
funny. Get out and see the world. Sorry.
And I just think I love traveling. It gives me the bug to want to get out and then just experience anything I can. And I'm very fortunate that I've got a girlfriend who's seems very up for adventures and likes trying new things as well. So it's great, being with someone who you talk about lots of things that you'd like to do and try and have someone
Yeah.
to share those experiences with too. So yeah.
Tell us about your podcast.
So sorry, losing my voice. I started my podcast, so it's called the Disability Sports Podcast, and I started it in 2022. So, my passion as a sports journalist was always trying to promote disability sports. It just felt to me like a very under reported area. So, on each episode of my podcast, I would interview an athlete from various disability sports in the UK and do like an in-depth interview. So, each episode would last somewhere between maybe half an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how the conversation went. Um, I think I've done about 47 episodes. I, hosted it, edited it, published it, promoted it all myself. I had sort of a couple of episodes with my friend Miguel, kind of helped me with like the filming and editing side. But other than that, it's sort of all been my own work. Unfortunately, I think the last episode probably came out around November time. So I had to put it on hold for a little bit, just with life being sort of very busy with other things going on at the moment. But I hope to, kind of come back with a second series at some point. I really enjoyed doing it. For me, I love people. Like people are so interesting. Like everyone has a different story to tell, and I think the reason I love disability sports as well is like everyone in some way has kind of overcome adversity, and but equally, when you do interviews, so for example, like, I'm sure you guys know who David Beckham is, for example, and from a sporting point of view, like I could interview David Beckham, and I'm sure he's a great guy, and I'm sure it'd be interesting. But we already know so much about him. Whereas when you've got someone who has a great story, but that story hasn't been told, like that for me is the best thing. Is like, and it's a privilege being able to talk to people and help to share their stories. I think, and I've had some really nice feedback from some of the people I interview saying that you ask good questions, and it's different to the sort of interviews we're used to. And I think a bit like you guys, with me, you're not afraid to just ask questions. That's what no matter what the topic, and that's a good thing because
Yeah.
that's how you build a rapport with people. And like I say, everyone's career path is different as well. So to me, I just find people fascinating, and like I say, I hope to come back with a second series at some point in the future as well because I did really enjoy doing it. So.
It sounds very similar to our road. We want to talk to the people that haven't been able to tell their story. We get something from every single person that we talk to.
Yeah.
Aaron, we'd love to help you and get you out here to Australia in 2027. So please do keep in touch and let us know if there's anything that we can help you with. We've loved speaking with you today. Thank you so much for sharing your life, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Absolutely. Well, no, thank you very much for having me on, guys. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. And, like I said, I've listened to some of the episodes and your podcast is great. So, please keep up the great work that you're doing. And, look forward to hopefully chatting with you again at some point in the future.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Aaron. Take care.